I get a lot of questions about poles. Should I bring them on my next hike? Should I leave them at home? Are they gonna help my knees or my back? Well, I dug into the research today, and what I found might surprise you. So I'll finish today with the 3 questions you should ask yourself when you're deciding if you should bring your poles hiking or not. But if you're new here, hey, my name's Alicia, and this is WILDR Fitness. We use the Adventure Ready model to get you fit for adventures of all kinds. So there's actually been a fair amount of research on the use of poles in the last few years. And it turns out poles change everything from how many calories you burn when you're out hiking to the actual way that you're hiking and how you're using your joints. Now I'm gonna talk about that next part in a minute, but first, let's dive into the effects that poles have on your joints. So depending on where you're hiking, you're gonna be doing a lot of uphill, downhill, or flat walking. And the forces or the load that goes through each of your joints is going to change based on the incline you're on and the terrain that you're walking through. When you hike with poles, you actually change the posture that you're hiking with and how much of the load or weight of your body and pack you're sharing between your lower and upper body. Turns out hiking with poles has the least amount of effect when you're walking on flat ground. Flat ground walking showed the least amount of difference between using or not using poles. But it turns out poles actually reduce the amount of load you have through your ankles, hips, and knees on the uphill and the downhill. On that downhill, poles encourage more of a hip-hinged position, which is going to change the amount of force through the knees and ankles specifically. And on the uphill, poles encourage more of an upright stature. In both these cases, the upper body was working more and we saw a reduced amount of load through all the joints of the lower body. But remember, less load isn't always better. In fact, having progressively more load through your muscles, tendons, and bones is what encourages your body to make those tissues strong. So this research isn't saying that we should always use poles all of the time. But if you tend to have sore muscles or joints in your lower body after a big day hiking, you might add poles for part of your day and work at progressively strengthening those areas of your body. And if you're out for a day that's longer or has more elevation than you're used to, using poles can help make sure that your body is ready for that time outside. Now, another reason you might be tired after a big day hiking has to do with balance. Whether you're on rocky or rooty land or you're crossing narrow bridges while you're hiking, poles add a little bit of knowledge to your brain about where your body is in space. We call that proprioception. And having that extra sense of feeling can reduce the mental load of being out on mixed terrain, helping you feel fresh for longer. Now, if you get into hiking really steep, shaly or rocky terrain where it's easier to use your hands, poles might make it more awkward in these situations or even more dangerous. But the most surprising thing I learned about poles when digging into the newest research has to do with calorie consumption. And the effect on how many calories you actually burn when you're hiking up a hill with poles might change your decision on whether or not you're going to bring them on your next hike. Think about this. If you're on your feet for 8 or 9 or 10 hours in a day, every calorie spent counts. You're emptying the bank account of the energy you have available, and then you're adding it back in with food that you've brought along the trail. Now, it turns out using poles has been shown to increase calorie use by our body by over 20%. On an uphill. 20% is a really big number. But the super interesting thing they found in this same study was that participants didn't think they were working any harder. Their RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, was the same even though they were working 20% harder with the addition of poles. The takeaway here is that bringing poles on the trail might mean a small increase in calorie burn, and that whenever you're out hiking, you need to make sure that you are refueling yourself, especially with carbohydrates and protein, so that your body can rebuild after a day of hiking. Now, poles have other uses. I use my poles as the center pole for my camping shelter when I'm backpacking. And you could also use a pole as a splint in case of injury on the trail. But here at WILDR, we're talking about the physical aspects of getting active and outside. So I'll leave those for a different video. This last point, however, is super interesting. I had a client who was getting hand swelling when they were doing big elevation days hiking. So their fingers would literally be bigger at the end of the day, and they felt really weird. What was actually happening for her was she was getting fluid accumulating in her hands after walking all day. And the cool thing about our bodies is we actually use muscular contractions to help our fluids and blood get back to our heart while we're hiking. So when she added poles, this problem disappeared because she was using more upper body muscles as she was hiking, and she was keeping her hands slightly higher, meaning it was easier for those fluids to get re-moved back around her body by her heart. But without further ado, the 3 questions I ask myself when I'm deciding to take poles or not. Question 1, how long is my day outside? If it's a really long day, bringing poles, especially mine that can break down and adjust in height, are gonna mean that I've got variety in my movement. Sometimes I'll use the poles, sometimes I'll put them in my pack. And that's gonna help reduce fatigue on certain muscles and movement patterns, meaning I get more jump in my step for the whole day. My second question is, what does the terrain look like? If I'm on rocky terrain that would be really hard to use poles on anyways, or I'm doing more of a scramble where I'm hands-on, then I'm gonna leave that pole at home. Finally, I'll ask if I have any other uses for the pole. So if I'm going on an overnight trip, I'm using it as the center pole for my camping structure, or if I'm filtering water, I'm gonna use it as my stand for my filter. Sometimes I'll even put my GoPro on it, and so it'll be the stand for my GoPro as well. What are the questions you ask yourself before you decide if you're bringing poles hiking or not? Drop them in the comment box below, and thank you for joining me for another video. Have a wilder day, and we'll talk to you guys soon.